William had spent most of his life in the Pacific Northwest, hunting big game for a living. He knew the area like the back of his hand, from the dense forests to the winding rivers. Despite his years of experience, there was one place that made him uneasy: the remote woods around the highway known for its accidents. Legends had spread about the area, and the locals whispered about the ghost of the highway, a vengeful spirit that haunted the woods and preyed on unsuspecting travelers. One winter, a group of wealthy hunters contacted William, wanting to go on a hunting trip in the area. William hesitated but eventually agreed to guide them, knowing that it would be a lucrative opportunity. As they drove down the highway, William pointed out the landmarks and shared stories about the legends of the area. The wealthy clients laughed it off, dismissing the tales as superstition and believing that their modern equipment and knowledge would keep them safe. As they set up camp in the woods, William felt the air grow thick with an ominous presence. He sensed that something was watching them, and he couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. Despite his experience, he had never felt so on edge before. He warned the clients about the dangers of the woods and urged them to be cautious, but they brushed off his concerns. Little did they know that they were about to face a horror beyond their imagination. The night air was frigid as the hunters sat around their campfire, swapping stories and jokes. William sat quietly, his senses alert for any sign of danger. Suddenly, a branch snapped in the distance, and William jumped up, his hand on his rifle. The hunters laughed, thinking he was being overly cautious, but William knew that the forest was full of unseen threats. As the night wore on, the hunters grew increasingly boisterous, drinking and shouting into the darkness. William tried to keep them quiet, but they ignored him. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the air, sending shivers down William's spine. The hunters fell silent, looking around in fear. Then another scream, closer this time. William grabbed his rifle and motioned for the hunters to follow him. They crept through the darkness, the only sound the crunching of leaves beneath their feet. Then they saw it, a figure, pale and ghostly, standing in the moonlight. The hunters froze in fear, and William knew that they were facing the ghost of the highway. He raised his rifle, but it was too late. The spirit vanished into thin air, leaving the hunters trembling with fear. William knew that they had to leave the woods immediately, but the hunters were too terrified to move. They begged him to stay with them until morning, but William knew that it was a mistake. As the night wore on, the hunters' fear turned to madness, and they began to turn on each other. William knew that they had to escape the woods before it was too late. William took charge, leading the hunters through the forest as quickly and quietly as possible. They stumbled through the underbrush, branches whipping their faces, their breath coming in ragged gasps. William could hear the hunters' hearts pounding in their chests, and he knew that they were close to breaking. Suddenly, they heard a twig snap behind them. William turned, raising his rifle, but there was nothing there. The hunters began to panic, and William knew that they had to keep moving. They pushed on through the darkness until they finally saw the faint glow of headlights in the distance. They had made it to the highway. As they emerged from the forest, they saw a car pulled over on the side of the road. A woman was standing by the car, frantically waving her arms. William approached her cautiously, his rifle at the ready. She told him that her car had broken down and that she needed help. William knew that it could be a trap, but he also knew that they couldn't leave her there alone. As they worked to fix her car, William kept a close eye on their surroundings. He sensed that they were being watched, and he knew that the ghost of the highway was still out there, waiting for them. Just as they finished fixing the car, they heard a low growling sound. William turned to face the darkness, his rifle at the ready, as a pair of glowing eyes emerged from the trees. The hunters froze as they saw the glowing eyes. William recognized the beast. It was a wolf, but much larger than any wolf he had seen before. It was staring straight at them, its eyes unblinking. William could see the panic in the hunters' faces and knew that he had to act fast. He whispered to the hunters to stay calm and slowly back away. But as they took a step back, the wolf growled and stepped forward. William raised his rifle, aiming for the heart, and fired. The wolf yelped in pain and ran off into the darkness. The hunters let out a collective sigh of relief, but William knew that they couldn't let their guard down. They quickly got back in their cars and started driving, with William leading the way. They had to make it to their destination before the ghost of the highway caught up to them. As they drove, William couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. He checked his rearview mirror constantly, but he didn't see anything. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the middle of the road, and William slammed on the brakes. It was a man, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, and he was covered in blood. The hunters were frozen with fear, but William knew that they had to help the man. As they got out of their cars, the man started speaking in a language they didn't understand. William approached him cautiously, his rifle at the ready, and tried to calm him down. But as he got closer, he saw that the man's eyes were completely black. William felt a shiver run down his spine as he looked into the man's dark eyes. He had heard stories about the ghost of the highway possessing the bodies of travelers it encountered, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this was exactly what was happening. The man continued to speak in a language they didn't understand, and William tried his best to communicate with him. Suddenly, the man lunged forward, his fingers reaching for William's neck. William dodged out of the way and raised his rifle, but the man was too fast. The hunters rushed to William's aid, but it was too late. The man had already grabbed hold of him, and William could feel his grip tightening around his throat. He struggled to breathe as the man's eyes bore into his own. In a moment of desperation, William reached for his pocket knife and plunged it into the man's chest. The man let out a blood-curdling scream and collapsed to the ground, his body convulsing. William gasped for air as the other hunters gathered around him. As they looked down at the man's lifeless body, William realized that they had been wrong about the ghost of the highway. It wasn't a ghost at all. It was something far more sinister, and they had just come face to face with it. The hunters quickly got back in their cars and drove off, leaving the body behind. William knew that they couldn't go to the authorities. No one would believe their story. They had to keep what they had witnessed a secret for their own safety. As they drove away, William couldn't help but think about the man's eyes. The same eyes he had seen in the wolf earlier that night. He realized that they had been staring into the eyes of evil, and he didn't know if they would ever be able to escape it.